Michael Richards, this resident artist,
Right.
and the Twin Towers. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yeah. Yes. His story is, it's tragic, but, fascinating. Michael Richards, and this is Michael Rolando Richards, not Michael Richards, the comedian. But Michael Rolando Richards was a sculptor, a black sculptor in, the 90s. I mean, he was sort of an up and coming, sculptor in the New York art world, in the 90s. And he did a series of, like, all of his works were like obsessed with flight. And, he would do these, sculptural self-portraits of himself as a Tuskegee Airman. And the Tuskegee Airmen were, black aviators in World War II who sort of distinguished themselves, in their piloting, but then were subject to all the racism that you might expect. And anyway, he would portray himself as a Tuskegee Airman. In some sculptures, he had crashed to the ground, or he had tried to parachute, or was trying to parachute into a target that was too small, or, and in the sculpture that made him most famous, which he did in 1999 while he was in Miami, he portrayed himself as a Tuskegee Airman standing vertically erect and levitating off the ground and being impaled by a bunch of airplanes. And the sculpture is called Tar Baby versus Saint Sebastian. And Saint Sebastian was the medieval saint who, is always depicted like pierced by arrows. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so he depicted himself pierced by planes as a martyr, pierced by planes. Okay. So he, on the basis of the strength of his work, including, I assume, that sculpture, and this would be another time loop, he was awarded studio space for 6 months in the Twin Towers. The Lower Manhattan Cultural Council had been issuing studios to like cohorts of 15 artists, like for 6 months. So 2 cohorts a year, and so he was part of the summer 2001 cohort of artists, and he, alone among those artists, had stayed in his studio the night of September 10th and was killed on the morning of September 11th. So when you know that story, and then you see this sculpture that he did, where he's martyred, impaled by planes. But the thing is, people who visited his studio said that he was working on other sculptures that were similarly like unbelievable. Like one of them was of him riding a burning meteor. And another one was of his torso, with wings, like it was called Fallen Angel. So, and his other works, he did some pen and pencil stuff too, including one that had a plane crash, like a lot of sculptures of planes crashing.
That's so crazy.
So yeah, what do you make of that? And, it's, but the thing is, this is so common, in artists. And when you delve into the lives of artists, I mean, there are a lot of famous cases. So there's a famous case that I talk about in Time Loops, and you'll read about it in most any book on ESP, was Morgan Robertson, who was the science fiction author, around the turn of the 20th century, who wrote this famous novel. Well, it was not famous at the time, but he wrote this novel called Futility, about the collision of the biggest ever ocean liner called the Titan with an iceberg on an April night in the North Atlantic on its third voyage between Liverpool and New York. Okay. So, 14 years later.
And you have blue-blooded elite families.
Yes.
On board.
And they all die because there's not enough lifeboats.
It's the Titanic.
It's the Titanic, essentially. Stories like that. But the thing is, when you delve into and it's easy for skeptics to go, oh, well, in a world of, chance, that's going to happen, sometimes. And then we single out those examples and we make something of them, but it's all just random. Well, no, I mean, when you study the lives of artists, you find this stuff happens all the time, not necessarily with big events in the news. I mean, mostly, as with precognitive dreams, it happens mostly with personal upheavals in our own lives, things that wouldn't necessarily even be significant to anybody else, but they are meaningful to us. And when we're dreaming or when we're creating art or whatever, those things come out. And it's just incredibly, incredibly common. I mean, I have so many, I filled this book with examples and I've got a million more, I'm writing a second book on the same, a similar subject with even more cases from writers. So it's a very, very common phenomenon.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The idea that prophets aren't real that's a modern idea. That's a symptom of modernity. It's not, that's kind of an aberration if you look at actually like the long time scale of human civilization. And you even, I don't know, this is a weird example, but like Alex Jones, say what you will about the guy as far as some of his other beliefs, but are you familiar with, he had an on-air call on CNN where he goes, Osama bin Laden, if you take down the Twin Towers, I'm going to come after you or something. Like, it's just this absurd, like, literally what happened in 6 months before. And he's on cable. You can't fake that. He's on, CNN.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
There's a million.
There's so
prophecies, whatever you want to call them, of 9/11. I mean, there's, simply by virtue of the fact that, there was the internet already at that point, and, people can now collect all that stuff and put it online. So it's like, it's an overwhelming mass of material, prophecying that event. But
yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, there's so many. My dad actually he's kind of a self-help author, and he wrote a book called The Tools, and in it he talks about how he would always dream of an earthquake on January 17th, and that was both the day, that's my birthday, that's the day I was born, and then 2 years later that was the Northridge quake.
Oh wow.
And we live in LA, and so I don't know. Very, very interesting. And I bet you the more people you poll, like it's a much higher percentage of people that can sort of pull these examples out, than would meet the eye. One interesting instantiation of this that we've talked about, in our phone calls is you have this remote viewing program that the CIA ran. I think it was CIA and then DIA from 1972 to 1995. And it was a psychic spy program. And whenever I tell people this, they're like, no way, like that can't be real. But you have guys like Joseph McMoneagle who have won the Legion of Merit for over 200 instances in which he's helped, add intelligence in very vital cases, finding hostages, drawing up, Russian nuclear sites, like pretty intense, interesting stuff. And you even have Jessica Utz, who's a statistician out of Stanford, I believe, and Ray Hyman, who's a skeptic, I think out of University of Oregon, coming in saying, we expect this maybe to be debunked, and, coming in with a, pretty scientific method, going through the, recently declassified documents for Stargate. That's the name of the program, and coming out saying, we think there's some inexplicable thing here. And we actually think that there is sort of a psychic function when it comes to human beings. So
Utz, did an analysis of a lot of evidence for psychic functioning, not just the Stargate program, I don't believe. And she found overwhelming evidence. And she's been very, very vocal about this. I mean, she was the president of the American Statistical Society and stuff one year. And she's, in her address that year, her presidential address, she said, this is evidence that nobody would question. It's so strong. The statistical, the quality of the evidence is so strong that if it were in any other field, nobody would question this.
yes,
But people reject it, and they don't even want to see the evidence. They reject. They don't even want to confront the evidence.
it's fascinating. And every elite university, from the Rhine Center at Duke, I think that was 1931 to 1960, and then you have SRI, in the late 60s, early 70s. You have the Princeton Anomalous Research Lab. You have WashU St. Louis with McDonnell Douglas. They had a parapsychology program. You have a lot of these elite universities pretty open-minded when it comes to kind of mind over matter effects and remote viewing. And you talk to anybody from those programs and they all come out saying, yeah, we're pretty sure they're like weak effects. They're hard to instrumentalize. That's hard to turn in. We can't turn them into math. We're in the Stone Age in this stuff, but it's real.